Hey, what's going on? I'm Monz, and this is Monz on the mic, where we cover the chaos that is unfolding in our country and analyze all the events that are going on. And maybe once in a while, I'll cover a couple of crazy cop videos. And if you like some crazy cop stories, please check out my new book, 20 and Out. It's available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. There's a free preview available also. So that would be great if you wanted to check that out. So for this episode today, I wanted to quickly go over Operation Crossfire Hurricane and why you should even care about it. So in 2016, remember, we had Trump versus Hillary. In April of 2016, the DNC and the Clinton campaign, who used Mark Elias, who was the attorney for the Clinton campaign, to hire Fusion GPS to conduct research on Trump to use against him in the lead up to the election. In June, Fusion GPS then hires this guy, Christopher Steele, a former MI6 British intel guy and Russia expert, to investigate Trump's ties to Russia. A few weeks after he's hired, Steele gives his first report to Fusion GPS that supposedly has compromising material on Trump, some of which includes Trump and his inner circle conspiring with Russia and Putin to put out fake intelligence on Hillary, which, as an aside, is perfect to explain away the truthful accusations that may come out against Hillary and her corruption and misconduct. Just to say, well, it's Putin and Trump and their lies and they're putting it out there. See, this is further proof of how he's collaborating with Russia. But in any case, they put this dossier out. So Steele meets with his FBI handler, this guy Michael Guetta, in London, and gives the dossier to him. Guetta was stationed in Rome, but received permission from this chick Victoria Nuland to travel to the UK to meet with this guy Steele. So who's Victoria Nuland? She is at the heart of all of the corruption, all the under the table backdoor dealings. She's at the center of the Ukraine disaster. So in another podcast, we'll get into her and what she's been involved in. But at the time, Nuland was Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasia Affairs. Nuland had been working with Steele since 2014, obtaining intel from him about Russia and Ukraine. Nuland was also heavily involved with Ukraine and their government and had received Steele's intel reports prior to his dossier when he would provide general intel to the State Department. When Nuland received a few pages of Steele's dossier on Trump, she forwarded the reports to the FBI for further investigation. Steele shared his dossier with not just the FBI and the State Department, but also with Fusion GPS and reporters. So Nuland facilitates the meeting between Guetta and Steele. The CIA gets a hold of this dossier, and Brennan, who was CIA chief at that time, briefs the Gang of Eight in Congress. John Kerry, who was then Secretary of State, received the information. The Justice Department received the dossier. And so the dossier that was paid for by Fusion GPS, who was hired by Hillary Clinton, made it to the highest levels of our intelligence agencies, our investigative, and our prosecutorial levels of government. So now this guy, Bruce Orr, was a top Justice Department member whose wife, Nellie, worked for Fusion GPS. So he calls up Guetta, pressing him to make sure that the FBI, quote, is doing something with the dossier. And that's according to Guetta's congressional testimony. So Orr states during a phone conversation to Guetta, which also came out during congressional testimony, have you seen this stuff from Steele? We just want to make sure we, or me and my bosses, want to make sure the FBI is handling it and doing something about it, end quote. Orr was not happy that the investigation was not moving fast. So now Orr's wife, Nellie, was found to have conspired with her husband to ensure that high-level FBI officials received her work on creating disinformation about Trump and Russia colluding together. Nellie and her husband met with Steele in 2016. And she deleted emails with DOJ prosecutors who were looking to bring a case against Trump. What does that tell you? She also sent Fusion GPS research to DOJ officials on multiple occasions. She was involved in the creation of the Alpha dossier, which Steele also created to attempt to show communications between Trump and the Alpha Bank in Russia. This has all since been disproven, the Alpha and the Steele dossiers, with zero corroborating evidence to support it. In any case, at the time, Fusion GPS worked with media companies to spread the false information to the American public to make the FBI's opening of an investigation into Trump appear legitimate. Recently deceased Rob Reiner created the Committee to Investigate Russia, which was a political NGO, which featured John Brennan, who was the former CIA director, and James Clapper, who was the National Intelligence Director, as advisors. Hollywood and the intel community have worked together for decades, and perpetuating the Russia lie continued this trend. Peter Strzok at the FBI officially opens up an investigation into Trump, using the information that was paid for by Hillary Clinton to spy on members of the Trump campaign. It was later discovered that Strzok and his girlfriend Lisa Page, who was a lawyer for the FBI, shared many text messages referring to Trump in derogatory terms. And also, Strzok stated to Lisa that they would, quote, stop Trump from becoming president. The warrant to spy on Carter Page, who was Trump's advisor, was renewed 3 times, and the FISA court was never advised that the intel that was used to provide probable cause to get wiretapping warrants was obtained through paid opposition research, which obviously the court would have immediately questioned the validity of the claims in the dossier if they had known this, or at least we hope they would. The FBI also offered Steele $1 million to provide corroborating information about the allegations he made that Trump was colluding with Russia. So to me, that sounds like the FBI gives Steele enough money to pay people to corroborate his lie so that it looks more credible. Bribery money to get people to lie. So there are other sources besides Steele. Nellie, the wife, lied under oath, stating she had no knowledge of the DOJ's Trump-Russia investigation. She was referred for prosecution, but the DOJ at the time did not prosecute her. Bill Barr was the attorney general at the time. We'll get into him in another podcast, but it's very clear that he also was not a Trump fan, even though he was appointed by Trump. And that's why he chose not to prosecute, because these people were actually, he agreed with them. In any case, Skeda, who was Steele's handler, confronts Steele in November of 2018, a few days before the election, asking how this magazine Mother Jones received information about the dossier. So Skeda asked Steele, did you leak the information? And Steele said, yeah, I was angry that the FBI had been investigating Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server, that she used it to speak about classified intelligence instead of investigating my report on Trump and Russia. So Steele was biased from the get-go. He didn't like Trump. He created all this information. He gave them exactly what they wanted to try and destroy Trump's credibility, possibly creating a criminal case that could be used to imprison or impeach Trump and ensure that Hillary would be victorious, as well as deflect news stories about Hillary Clinton using an unauthorized email server that would not be tracked by the State Department. Skeda, who was actually not biased, but probably a little stunad or gullible, he really failed to ask follow-up questions regarding the dossier when he was given it. He was kind of just taken aback by the information and then sent it up the chain without really, from what it seems, asking follow-up questions, which when I worked with confidential informants, my first question I always asked them was, how do you know this information? But because Steele had been working in the intel community for a long time, I suppose that he assumed that the information that he was given was accurate. But with informants, you can never make that mistake. You always have to think that they're working from an angle, and it doesn't seem that Skeda actually did that here. But to his credit, once he found out that Steele had an angle and his goal was to make Trump look bad and discredit him and possibly get a criminal prosecution against him, he immediately stopped FBI contact with Steele. His communication with him was cut. Skeda deactivated Steele, which is done when you find out that an informant is not credible anymore. You have to just cut them loose. But the damage was already done. Top officials at the FBI and DOJ knew the Russian collusion info from Steele's dossier was paid for by Hillary, but they allowed the hoax to continue, which resulted in the tapping of phones of Trump's inner circle and a media frenzy which focused on the lies paid for by Hillary Clinton, making half of America believe that Trump was colluding with Russia. It carried over into his presidency, with Michael Flynn, who was the incoming national security advisor, being accused of colluding with Russia as well. But of course, a national security advisor is going to contact his counterparts in Russia and every other major country that we're looking to work with diplomatically for better foreign relations. But because the media, encouraged by Fusion GPS, who was paid for by Hillary, got the American people in a stir-crazy disaster about Trump and Russia, nobody wants to hear the facts. Nobody asks questions. Flynn, who is an American patriot, was removed from his position because of this public pressure. How is it possible that all of the reporters in the media failed to discover that the dossier, which precipitated wiretaps and criminal investigations, was paid for by Hillary Clinton, who was running against Trump? Is it possible that they didn't ask any questions and just looked the information they were given as a fact instead of asking follow-up questions because they were told to just take that information at face value? We have to look at who controlled the main media sources in 2016. And this is where it gets interesting. So who owned ABC? Disney. Disney main stockholders are Vanguard and BlackRock. Who owns NBC? Comcast. And Comcast has shareholders including Vanguard and BlackRock. This also includes MSNBC. Who owns CNN? Warner Brothers. And their main shareholders are, you guessed it, Vanguard and BlackRock. Who owns CBS? In 2016, it was the Redstone family, and Shari Redstone donated a lot of money to the DNC and their Hillary Clinton campaign. Who owned CNBC in 2016? BC Universal, which is a subsidiary of Comcast, and Comcast major shareholders are Vanguard and BlackRock. What about Fox News? It was founded by Roger Ailes, working under Rupert Murdoch. It should be noted that in 2016, when the Russian collusion hoax was in full swing, Fox News reporters were questioning the allegations that were being made. That same year, Ailes was accused of sexual harassment and he was removed from his position. The Murdoch family own and run Fox News and a larger corporation called News Corp, which includes the New York Post. Vanguard and BlackRock do own shares of News Corp as well. Vanguard and BlackRock are basically investment firms that own trillions in stocks worldwide. They are the largest shareholders in S&P firms, and along with State Street, own huge portions of every publicly traded company. In short, they are central to corporate decision making. But who owns them? Well, the Vanguard Group is the largest stockholder in BlackRock. And the guy who is currently the CEO of the Vanguard Group, Salim Ramji, previously was the head of BlackRock's iShares division. And up until 2018, the largest shareholder of BlackRock was the George Soros Management Fund. The CEO of BlackRock is this guy named Larry Fink. Fink is the co-chair of the World Economic Forum. George Soros speaks at the World Economic Forum every single year, and Klaus Schwab created it. It is from the World Economic Forum that many corporate policies originate. Every year in January, leaders, corporate heads, and powerful influencers like Al Gore, Zelensky, Bill Gates, CEOs from Microsoft and Pfizer, Greta Thunberg, Xi Jinping, and even Donald Trump made an appearance, although he made an appearance to basically speak against what the World Economic Forum stands for. So Trump spoke about lowering taxes, America being open for business, lowering oil and gas prices. This was in stark contrast to what is normally discussed at the yearly Davos meeting. It normally focuses on climate change, water and food security, and net zero emissions targets. So to pause for a second, understand that the people who own all of these media companies own companies in which they have an agenda and they work with people, Vanguard and BlackRock work with the World Economic Forum and the UN to push forth an agenda. And Trump was not pushing forth the agenda that they wanted. He wasn't a team player for them. So they had to do something to destroy him. They worked in cahoots with all these other people who all wanted to discredit Donald Trump for different reasons. One for power and control, one because Donald Trump might expose corruption that they were involved in, one that maybe Donald Trump was going to potentially stop illegal money from being funneled to causes that they would get kickbacks from. There's all kinds of different reasons, but the goal was we can't let Trump get into office because he's going to foil all of our little dirty little plots that we've got going on here. So that's why you see coordination, when you look closely, between the mainstream media companies, the World Economic Forum, and politicians, because they all have their hands into the cookie jar and they're all working together behind the scenes. In any case, the World Economic Forum sees climate change as a global threat. Members focus on utilizing ESG to promote these ideals. ESG stands for environmental and social governance. They also like to focus on public-private partnerships, cybersecurity, and reforms for global institutions like the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. All of this stuff sounds nice and cozy and warm, which is the intent. Take a look under the surface, and the true point comes out. The WEF has a formal partnership with the UN. Their plan, Sustainable Development Goals that align with the UN's Agenda 2030, along with a push for gender equality, climate change, health, and digital cooperation. The problem is the goals and Agenda 2030 directly conflict with America's free market system. Its ideal of meritocracy, which has propelled the United States into becoming the most powerful, richest, and smartest nation until it was interfered with. So the WEF and the UN have joined forces, and they're also for a shift to all electric vehicles, for example, for all nations. For one, this limits the choices for the consumer, which goes along with a socialist communist ideology. It restricts demand artificially, which will lead to less competition, which increases prices. Additionally, what it takes to create the batteries alone for these electric cars harm the environment far more than the methods used to extract oil from the earth. The rare minerals needed are neodymium, praseodymium, and terbium. Don't know how to pronounce them, but those are the rare earth minerals that are needed. These are taken from the earth mostly by mining, which strips the earth of trees, vegetation, and homes for those tiny forest creatures that we all care about. Next, a chemical process refines the metals and separates them from the rock. The waste products from these items alone, which are only used for the magnets in the engines, are toxic. For every ton of rare earth minerals produced, up to 2,000 tons of toxic waste can be generated. This waste often contains heavy metals and processing chemicals that can contaminate soil and ecosystems. The refining process produces toxic water laden with acids and heavy metals, which contaminate local waterways. The entire process used to refine the metals utilizes coal power, which is incredibly ironic since most lefty climate change people believe that the coal power is poisoning the earth and they're completely against it. But actually, coal power is utilized to create electric cars. I wonder if we went around and asked people driving these green cars that are so wonderful for the environment if they knew what was actually done to extract the rare earth minerals needed for just engine parts alone, not even the lithium and the other materials needed for the batteries, and the environmental fallout from the production of these items if they would still be for these cars. This is all exactly what the powers that be, like the teenage moron Greta Thunberg, stand for. Policies of which they only know the headlines for. But once you take a peek under the beautifully woven carpet of save the earth, buy electric cars, all it shows is more ugly pollution. But that's not convenient for these green earth maniacs. And they certainly have not been taught to ask questions about how these cars are made. They're only taught to believe what they're told. This goes right back to our broken education system and the demand to listen to your teacher and write what they want to hear, not research a topic thoroughly and find out what the entire picture is. We have been taught to just believe what we're told and not ask questions. The stupefaction of our generation was done intentionally by people like these leaders at the UN and WEF, so that when they say electric cars are green, we believe them. The truth, the sourcing for components needed for them destroys the environment. Electric cars can be remotely accessed. Travel can be restricted. And as we see in major cities in China, it is used for complete control. Put a message on Facebook that the ruling elites don't like, you can't drive your electric vehicle. It's been turned off. Oh, you'll just use Uber? Your credit card has been turned off too. Want to use cash instead? No, these people don't want cash. They want to have a cashless system so you don't have the freedom of using cash to buy things. Yes, the World Economic Forum is all about cashless society. You can Google it, benefits cashless society mobile payments at the World Economic Forum. They've published extensively on digital payments, highlighting the benefits of a cashless society like improved financial inclusion, reduced crime, and economic growth, while discussing challenges like ensuring access for the unbanked, sounds like the unhoused, and the need for resilient infrastructure. But see how they frame their argument with these beautiful words? Improved, reduced crime, growth, access for the unbanked. Who can't get access to a bank and create a bank account? All of those words are created purposely to make it sound like what they are doing is for the benefit of all. But once again, if we dig a little bit deeper, we find out that it is for consolidation and control. Think this is just fear mongering? It's already happening in cities all over the world. Have you ever heard of a 15-minute city? This will be the epicenter of these policies, and it will institute total control over the populace. Paris, Portland, places in Australia, Barcelona, Milan, Dubai, all working towards the 15-minute city goal by 2030, hence Agenda 2030. Total control. Didn't get your mandated vaccination? Can't buy groceries. Don't have your vaccine passport on your iPhone? Can't get into any store. Can't buy anything. Amazon won't ship to your home because your bank account has been frozen. Still don't think it can happen? Check out what the Canadian government did to those protesting the shutdowns during COVID. The government froze their private bank accounts. I wasn't able to get into diners and restaurants without my vaccine passport during COVID. I was denied access. The goal is for all nations to sign on to the UN and WEF programs, making the UN and WEF a de facto non-elected government which controls your elected government. The European Union was the successful implementation of this plan. The EU is not elected by the people. They are picked by elected officials, and you have to make the assumption that there is money under the table or some kind of quid pro quo deals to gain that type of authority. And just like that, the people's will is subverted. In America, our government was created uniquely to prevent this type of control. It is a government created by the people, for the people. The elected officials serve us, and if they don't do so, they're removed from office. Let's get back to that ESG stuff, though. This was exposed months ago and luckily was scaled back. because of exposure of the plans through ESG. The global elite, the UN, the WEF, etc., can push their ideals onto private businesses. Private businesses are graded based on their compliance with ESG requirements. So, for example, one requirement is diversity in the workforce. If you have all white men, you get a poor score. If you have women or more diverse races working as executives and employees, you get a higher number. It is not based on the merit or qualifications of the individuals hired by a company, but by the race and gender, which is exactly what the civil rights movement fought against. This plan inherently makes companies produce less quality goods and make stupid business decisions because the people making the decisions are not qualified to do so. Who loses? The consumer and the employee, not the UN or the WEF. In fact, it furthers their control because eventually these companies will be completely under their control or will be out of business, leading more people to apply for welfare, adding to the Cloward Piven strategy. And if you don't know what that is, check out my previous podcast discussing it. It is that simple. In any case, with ESG, the primary mechanism for compliance is market pressure. Investors use these ratings to make informed decisions about where to allocate capital, believing that strong ESG performance indicates better long-term risk management and resilience. Companies with poor ratings might face divestment or find it harder to secure certain types of funding. So you comply with ESG or you face foreclosure. It's business by extortion and intimidation, not by merit and producing the best product. It's as anti-American as it gets. And companies throughout the US signed onto this program. It wasn't just the UN and WEF who pushed this agenda. Larry Fink, remember him, the CEO of BlackRock? He also pushed this agenda. And with his ownership of lots of stock and lots of companies, he had the ability to steer the direction of the companies he owned. But how would companies make money using a plan that would ensure their demise? Because the other side of ESG was to move from stock markets that ensured accountability to creating a stakeholder capitalist society. The shareholder system makes companies accountable to the people who own shares of the company. The goal is to make a profit, and everyone, not just the CEO, makes money. Provide goods that are in demand for a fair price, and your stock goes up, making money for all. Provide goods that people don't want or that are too expensive. People sell your stocks, people don't buy your product, and you lose your business. In a stakeholder system, the company is not answerable to shareholders. They answer to, say, the local government or the employees or society at large, all of whom may have conflicting goals, making for a less efficient company. An easy example is the demand for higher wages for workers and lower cost for consumers. If you have a great product, this will work. But if the government steps in and says, no, you can't make any more of those gas stoves, they harm the environment, then we have to go back to electric stoves, which may not work as well or are more costly to produce, which means we sell less, which means we can't pay our workers. It's like when the Obama administration came in and gave money to Solyndra to produce solar panels. Remember that? $35 million of taxpayer money to one company. At the time, there was not a demand for the product, and they were more expensive compared to their Chinese counterparts. The company collapsed, and the 1,100 employees that did have a job there were quickly out of one. The government tried to create a demand where it didn't exist. Perhaps if the company didn't have government funds to rely on, they would have innovated and created a better product for cheaper than the Chinese one, and they would have greatly succeeded, making money for the company to invest in the building of new plants and hiring more people. This is the problem with stakeholder capitalism. All of the ideals that the UN and WEF push in their Agenda 2030 set up Western society for failure. And that is exactly their intention. Take the replacement migration theory, which isn't actually a theory, but mainstream media labeled it a conspiracy theory that was created by racist white right-wing nut jobs. Google it right now and the results will say that it was a debunked plan by racist whites. But Google replacement theory, United Nations, and a 177-page document will come up titled Replacement Migration, with the subtitle stating, quote, "Is it a solution to declining and aging populations?" End quote. The paper examines 10 areas: the US, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Korea, Russia, the UK, including Ireland and Great Britain, and the EU as a whole. It notes that in essence, the populations of these countries are declining due to decreasing fertility, and so in order to sustain the workforce, people from the third world nations need to be imported into these Western societies to backfill the workforce. The levels of migration, and this is a quote from the document, the levels of migration needed to offset population aging are extremely large, and in all cases entail vastly more immigration than occurred in the past, end quote. Some suggestions of increasing the age of retirement to 75, reassess the healthcare benefits for the elderly, and policies and programs related to international migration, in particular, replacement migration, and the integration of large numbers of recent migrants and their descendants. Could this be why over 20 million unvetted illegals were allowed into our country to satisfy this agenda? After all, Biden's Build Back Better rant, remember that was the mantra when he was running for president from his basement? The Build Back Better plan was also the mantra for other world leaders like Boris Johnson, Jacinda Ardern, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. The World Economic Forum used it as their slogan in April of 2020, and Klaus Schwab has used it in terms of building back better for his, quote, Great Reset. He even wrote a book on it. You should check it out and read it. Major leaders all chanting the same catchphrase, all signaling they are working cohesively, working towards the goal of Agenda 2030. Trump was not going along with Agenda 2030. As a matter of fact, he made moves to pull back from it. That's why they had to get him out of office. What we have here is a global cabal, if you will, leaders and influential people from every country working together with the UN and WEF, along with compelling private businesses in the US, and funneling money through Soros's Great Society program and others to desecrate American society, using the media, which they work closely with and financially control, to spread the lies and discredit people who are actually speaking the truth. Do you need further proof? Do a search on where funding came for those who ran for DAs all across the country. Alvin Bragg received $1 million from the Color of Change PAC, which received that money directly from George Soros. Letitia James, Soros gave her $71,000 directly for her campaign for Attorney General of New York State, with other additional donations sent through some Soros-backed groups. Diana Becton of Contra Costa County, California, received money from Soros-backed groups. And here's a whole list of them. Buddha Bibaraj in Loudoun County, Virginia. Chesa Boudin, former San Francisco, California DA. Scott Collum, Lowndes County, Missouri. John Cruzat, Dallas County, Texas. Steve Descano, Fairfax County, Virginia. Kim Fox, former Cook County, Illinois State Attorney. Kim Gardner, former St. Louis, Missouri Circuit Attorney. George Gascon, former LA County District Attorney. Jose Garza, Travis County, Texas. Christian Gossett, who was a former Winnebago County DA. Andrea Harrington was a former Berkshire County DA. Joe Kahn, former candidate for Philadelphia DA. Larry Krasner, Philadelphia. Beth McCann, Denver, Colorado. Brian Middleton, Waller County, Texas. Marilyn Mosby, Baltimore, Maryland State Attorney. Kim Ogg, Harris County, Texas DA. Pamela Price, former Alameda County DA. Rachel Rollins, Robert Schuler Smith, Raul Torres, Andrew Warren, Monique Worrell, all Florida, New Mexico, Mississippi, all attorneys and attorney generals. George Soros's funding has primarily been directed toward candidates who advocate for criminal justice reform, such as ending mass incarceration and addressing police misconduct, rather than traditional tough-on-crime stances, which, in my 20 years of experience, is the best way to deter criminals from committing crimes. He fights to elect people who are going to let the criminals loose. There is only one outcome that happens when there is no tough on crime penalties: chaos in the streets. And that's what we're seeing now. And George Soros has been behind all of this. And a lot of our politicians, and it's not just the Democrats, there are Republicans who are on board with this as well, support these policies. And the point is to undermine our country and ruin the freedom that exists here. Who is George Soros anyway? Soros was born in Hungary in 1930 and was a Jew during the Nazi Holocaust. To escape persecution, he joined the Jewish Council, working as a courier to ensure that Nazi orders were implemented in Jewish ghettos. His father was a lawyer who was very smart, saw the writing on the wall, and got forged documents that they would all look like Christians. And then George Soros lived with another man who said that George Soros was his adopted godson. In any case, the members of the Jewish Council also carried out orders of the Nazis to deport Jews from ghettos and send them to concentration camps or locations where they would all be murdered. Sometimes members of the Jewish councils and Jewish police forces had privileges like access to more food, and many residents accused members of the Jewish council of collaborating with the Nazis in exchange for these privileges. There were times when members of the Jewish councils argued on behalf of the Jews to save their lives. Soros was asked during an interview if he felt any guilt about being involved with this group. Soros responded, no. For example, that I'm Jewish and here I am watching these people go. I could just as easily be there. I should be there. You didn't have any of that? Soros responded, well, of course, I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, in a funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. By it, he means the property of Jewish people that were already deported to concentration camps. And it was the whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator. The property was being taken away. So I had no role in taking away that property. I had no sense of guilt. And this is from a 60 Minutes interview in December 20th of 1998. So the question becomes, why is he not grateful that he made it to America? Why does he fund campaigns for people whose policies will destroy America? Because he hasn't just worked to destroy America. He's done it to other countries as well. And his answer to this is, quote, I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do. And this was a comment that he made after he was blamed for the financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia. Quote, he can move world financial markets simply by voicing an opinion or destabilize a government by buying and selling its currency. When he saw cracks in the Asia boom, he began selling the currency in Thailand. Traders in Hong Kong followed suit, triggering a financial crisis that plunged much of Asia into a depression. And that's also from the George Soros 60 Minutes interview transcript from December of 1998. Soros has given money through his Great Society Group and many others to finance groups that work within our country to undermine it and destroy the law and order that had once made us a great nation. In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban has led a high-profile campaign, including a Stop Soros law, claiming Soros has a secret plot to flood Hungary with migrants and destroy the nation's identity. Soros's Open Society Foundations eventually closed its Budapest office due to the hostile political climate. In Turkey, President Erdogan accused Soros of trying to divide and destroy nations, linking him to the 2013 protests. The Open Society Foundation ceased operations in Turkey as a result. In Russia, Russian intel has suggested that Soros's nonprofits undermine Russian sovereignty. Romania, Poland, Serbia, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Armenia, the Philippines, and Honduras. Political figures in these nations have made similar claims about Soros's involvement in unrest or a plot against their national interests. India and Bangladesh, claims have been made there that Soros used U.S. aid funds to spread chaos and seek personal gain in these countries. That is why there was such an uproar when Doge came in and started cutting off USAID funding, because it wasn't going to actually help poor children in Africa. It was going through multiple different bank accounts to be funneled into these NGOs and Great Society accounts linked to George Soros and others, which they would then use to undermine the country. So our own tax dollars were being used against us. In Ukraine, he was also been accused in some narratives of being connected to the loss of Crimea and the Donbass region. In the financial world, Soros is known for making large-scale currency trades that have had significant economic impacts on nations. In the UK, on September 16th, 1992, which is known as Black Wednesday, Soros's Quantum Fund shorted the British pound, betting it was overvalued within the European exchange rate mechanism. The sheer volume of the trade overwhelmed the Bank of England's efforts to defend its currency peg, forcing the UK to withdraw from the European exchange rate mechanism and devalue the pound. Soros made over $1 billion in profit during this, earning him the moniker the man who broke the Bank of England. Thailand and Malaysia. Soros was also accused by Malaysian leaders of contributing to the 1997 Asian financial crisis by betting against Asian currencies, including the Thai baht. We're going to get further into all the money Soros has poured into companies and ballot measures to change America in next week's podcast. But imagine when he crashes markets. People are invested in these markets. Their pension funds are invested in these markets. And all of a sudden, they have no money. So he's not doing this just to enrich himself, but he's making everyone else who's invested in the market poor. As I've said before, there are forces within our country working to undermine and destroy it. As you have seen here, there are also forces outside of America working with the forces inside of it with the common goal of reducing American might to ashes. These people don't care. They have power, they have money, and the means to survive while the rest of us fight each other for scraps of food. Power, money, and position is all these people care for. If you look at it on its face, it's just evil. The desire to destroy good, to change American history, to make it look like a country based on evil instead of what it actually is, which is good, to take the free market capitalism that has propelled people from poverty, which has never happened in any other country before without violence, and turn into crony capitalism with outside entities placing demands and determining wages and workforce instead of a free market, taking our system of justice and putting judges and district attorneys in places that will not adhere to our laws, but will be loyal to those who pad their pockets and give them power. It has poisoned the well of America, and it runs deep. Unfortunately, this doesn't even cover the vast amount of sewage that is strewn across our beautiful nation. In Minnesota, we are just seeing the beginning of the corruption that Musk and his Doge geniuses uncovered, and that which Nick Shirley has recently documented. If you think that tax dollars went to only bogus Somalia front companies and maybe some of it got forward to Muslim terror groups in Africa, wait for the full disclosure, if it's allowed to even happen. Democrats and some Rhino Republicans, who are all bought and paid for by these evil entities, create these money giveaways, which will be ripe with fraud. They know this and they don't care. The money is funneled to these daycare groups and healthcare front organizations who then send the money to other groups, and that money is then sent to line the pockets of the same politicians who authorized these help the poor payments in the first place. Ilhan Omar was elected to U.S. Congress in 2019, where her reported net worth at the time was negative $45,000. She makes $174,000 a year as a representative, which would mean if she saved every penny and invested and bought a house, she would be worth somewhere around $1.1 million. Instead, she's worth $30 million. How does that happen? I am hoping that the FBI will do a deep dive into her and her husband's financials and find out exactly where that money came from, because I suspect it originated from the pockets of people in Minnesota and not the ones from Somalia. If you remember, on June 14, 2025, Congresswoman from Minnesota, Melissa Hortman, was shot to death. It came 5 days after she voted with Republicans to remove illegal adults from the state healthcare system, and she was the sole Democrat to do so. In 2023, she had voted to allow the illegals to enroll in this healthcare program, but 2 years later, she changed her mind because it was the only way the budget would pass, according to a statement that she gave after the vote. Currently, there is an enormous investigation into large-scale fraud schemes involving the child care and other public assistance programs, as well as this particular healthcare program. Billions are suspected to have been stolen and redirected into the pockets of Somalis, both in Minnesota and in Somalia, and over 90 people so far have been charged in these crimes. Some of these funds were traced back to campaign contributions to Democrats in Minnesota, and one in Washington state. Attorney General Keith Ellison, State Senator John Hoffman, and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey were some of who received these contributions. The shooter of Hortman, Vance Bolter, stated that the governor, Tim Walz, wanted him to kill certain lawmakers. There is no evidence that this was the case, but we also wouldn't expect there to be. It makes some sense that the receivers of all these stolen funds would have to grease the wheels that are allowing this money to be funneled to them. It's how graft works. It would also make sense that the one person who stopped the flow of this money needed to be taken out to serve as a warning to anyone else who wanted to stop the gravy train. I'm surmising here based on nothing but understanding of how criminal enterprises work. You don't have to know too much about the Italian mafia in New York City to know that they would regularly pay off police and high-ranking officials to look the other way as they ran their criminal enterprises. I imagine it wasn't much different here. Either the Somalians paid off the government officials under the guise of campaign contributions, or the Somalians were told to funnel the cash in that manner. We should not be surprised at the scheme the Somalis have been operating. They were the primary slave traders in Africa, and Somalia was the hub of the East African and Arab slave trades. But you thought that it was just white people that just went into Africa and kidnapped them and brought them to America? No, that's not what happened. Somalians would capture the Africans, mostly Ethiopians, enslave them, and sell them in coastal markets. They are the pirates that are raiding ships in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea. These people don't have a nation. They have criminal enterprises and warring factions, and have an average IQ of 70, with the average IQ of Americans being 100. They are doing here only what they know from doing in their own country. The purpose of allowing immigrants into America is not just to save people who are being persecuted, but to bring in a skilled workforce who want to come here and fly an American flag, learn English, and contribute to our society. We have enough criminals running around thanks to Soros's DAs pushing this breakdown of society agenda that he has. I was watching Greg Gutfeld a few weeks ago, and he had a great point. There is this GTFO Netherlands escape plan where a private company helps Americans to escape the horrors of living under a Trump presidency by bringing them into the wonderful kingdom of the Netherlands. The irony is, in order to get into the Netherlands, you need to have a work permit and a job from a Dutch employer, or be an entrepreneur, and you have to have enough money to start that business and provide a business plan and proof of professional study, or you have to be a student. To get a permanent residency, you have to show you can read, speak, and write Dutch. You have to take a test to show you understand Dutch customs and culture, and have proof of job and housing and a clean criminal record. After 5 years of living there, you can try to become a citizen. And for the people fleeing because they feel Trump is acting like a king, the Netherlands has a king. He's for ceremonial purposes, but they've got a monarchy over there. So for all the people that think it's outrageous for America to not just allow anyone to walk across our border, I ask you to check out requirements for other countries to live and work there. Canada, you have to take a test and be able to speak French and English. Every country has rules because it wouldn't be a country if anyone could come in. Speaking of countries, I wanted to opine on the recent capture of Maduro, the tyrant of Venezuela. There's some things that you need to know. First, understand that he lost the last election, and instead of stepping down and peacefully transferring power, he declared that he had won and refused to step down. Protests began in the street, and people were arrested and run over by military tanks for protesting. He is the definition of a tyrant, which so many on the left said that Trump would be if he lost the election. So suddenly now, when we actually have a tyrant like Maduro, who refused to leave office when he was democratically voted out, they don't look at Maduro in the same way as Trump. Interesting. Second, Maduro has been running the cartel de los Sols. They get their name from the sun insignias on military uniforms. This cartel incorporated members of the government, the military, and Tren de Aragua to transport cocaine directly into America, causing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. Maduro ran this cartel. Third, Maduro and his wife were indicted by a grand jury for these crimes in 2020. That was 5 years ago. So there was an arrest warrant for both of them. Our military assisted the DOJ in the apprehension of these wanted individuals, and there are at least 2 cases of this happening prior to this incident, on top of many military operations to topple leaders of countries like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi in Libya. The reason why members of the left are saying this is an international crime and violates laws is because they themselves view Maduro and his policies as a goal they would love to achieve here. Maduro is an ally. He's a socialist. They're socialists. He's trying to undermine America, and so are they. And also, they have to try to destroy anything that Trump does because this entire operation was a display for the world that you don't mess with America. That is the greatest deterrent to invasion, war, and threat of war that you can get. Personally, I think that Trump during his press conference should have said, hey, the guy told me to come and get him. He invited us in, so we went in. What's the problem? Because that's literally what Maduro told Trump. I'm here. This is where I'm at. Come and get me, you coward. So Trump went and got him. He didn't invade. We didn't invade Venezuela. The DOJ apprehended a wanted fugitive utilizing the military to apply the minimum force necessary to effect the arrest. And as for Mamdani and his warmth of collectivism, now that he's been sworn in as mayor of New York City, collectivism is not what makes people independent of government. It makes them dependent of government, which makes them susceptible to the whim of that government. I am very excited to see the useful idiots who elected this man watch their precious rights that they never actually fought or sacrificed for stripped from them as they scream about the injustice of it all. Yuri Bezmenov spoke about this 40 years ago, and it remains true. If you think socialism in any form is good, understand you have no idea what you're talking about and zero grasp on economics or wealth of nations. If you think putting a green light on top of ground zero is a mark of solidarity, you have no idea what you're talking about. It's an insult to the thousands who died a torturous death on 9/11 because of Muslims. It's not a sign of solidarity, it's a sign of conquest. And we're going to see Mamdani's policies implemented very quickly, it seems. Right away, he's talking about having the city come in if landlords aren't taking care of properties. Well, what does that sound like? It sounds like the proposal of government takeover of private property. Granted, there are plenty of slumlords in New York City who leave their apartments in absolute disarray with no running hot water. And you know what? New York City is also guilty of this. There's plenty of problems in the projects where they don't have hot water, they don't have heat. There's plenty of instances of them not taking care of this in times of severe cold weather or bad and inclement weather. So this is not something new. It is a problem. But the government never runs anything efficiently. And what Mamdani's goal is to go in and say, well, you're not running this efficiently. Look at this. There's a broken door handle and people can't get in and out of the door. We're going to take it over. Now you say, well, we have private property rights in America. So how is the government going to take it over? Well, in New York City, there's plenty of other laws that allow them to do so. If you aren't compliant with the green energy that Hochul pushed for in New York State, they can technically take over the building and force implementation of these green energy ideals because you're not doing it. But for Mamdani, who swore on the Quran instead of the Bible when he swore in as mayor, I don't think he really cares about these laws. When you swear on the Bible, and the reason why we take our oaths to offices with our hand on the Bible, it's because our country was founded on these biblical principles. And I've spoken about this before. Private property, not guilty until found guilty by a jury of your peers. All of these things that America were built for are based on biblical principles. When you put your hand on the Quran, what you're swearing to is not anything that stands for America. The Quran doesn't supply for private property rights. The Quran doesn't provide for prohibition of slavery. As a matter of fact, the Quran says if the person's not Muslim, you can basically do whatever you want to them. We see in London that the women are getting raped by Muslims, and the Muslims articulate that they're allowed to do it because the people are not Muslim and they deserve it. So what we've done here is we have taken, because of people like the UN and the WEF pushing these agendas, we've taken the American spirit, which is what made our country great. If you will, the steak-eating, red-blooded American who forged this nation, who ran across this country and civilized it, and made laws that were fair to everyone across the board. And even though we were imperfect for a time, we had a document that allowed us to obtain as close to perfection as we can. And you've taken these Americans and you've made them afraid to speak. You've made them afraid to say anything for fear of being called a racist and being canceled and being demonized and ostracized and lose their job and have their bank account taken and have these psychos that are basically the brown shirts of the left wing come to their houses and threaten their kids. This is how these people work. And what we have with Mamdani is he's swearing on a Quran that goes completely against everything that this country was founded on. And I'm not anti-Muslim, because there are some Muslims who are good with America and they believe in our ideals. But when you read the Quran, and you can study this on the podcast that I did on Islamophobia, they don't believe in any of the principles. He said that he was going to swear to uphold the Constitution and the state of New York's Constitution and the city charter. But when he's swearing on the Quran allows him to lie. And it's okay because it's for the end goal. The end goal being Muslim takeover, socialist implementation. And by the city coming in and saying that he's going to start fixing the rental properties so that people can have fair housing, that is government taking over private property. That is not going to end well for you. It sounds wonderful and it'll probably work at first. He'll probably show that, look, the city is fixing these broken apartment houses that we've taken from these people. That's not how it's going to end. And we saw already that Times Square was shut down so that the Muslims could pray. This is what New York City is going to turn into. This is not about hatred or freedom of religion and being hateful and hating a certain people. I am just going by what this religion teaches their followers. Muhammad, when he first started the religion, his first action was to take all of his followers and to invade a city and take it over. And at first, the Jews and Christians were allowed to practice their religion. He allowed them to do so. But then they started the jizya. And they had a tax and they had to pay higher taxes and they weren't allowed to vote and they weren't allowed to have a say in their government. And they were basically treated like second-class citizens, like slaves, if you will, unless they converted to Islam. And then they were treated like equals. And I think slowly over the next few years, we are going to see this implementation happen. And the problem with socialism and the problem with the Muslim takeover is that once these things take over, it is very difficult to rid this cancer from that city. So I pray for New York City because I don't think that this is going to end well. And I think that these people that voted him in are going to be the first ones screaming that the things that he's doing are not based on equity and equality. It's based on favoritism and taking care of the government first and the people second. If you like this podcast, please hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you to our first responders, our emergency room personnel, our military, our ICE agents, our DHS agents, and the Secret Service who keep our elected officials safe, who keep us safe, and who worked over the Christmas and New Year's holiday while the rest of us enjoyed it and had celebrations. And we thank them for their service. Don't forget to check out my book, 20 and Out, available on Amazon in hardcover, Kindle, and paperback. And I will see you next time.